You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for hitting that play button. This is another episode of the Dave Bullis Podcast. Before we get to today's episode, no pre-show notes other than the fact is I want to say thank you to everybody who keeps sharing this podcast. I know you're probably sick of hearing me say that, but it truly does help out the show. It helps all of us out. And again, if you want to come help me out on a project I'm doing later this year, in the summer, in fact, of 2018, just shoot me an email. All the details are in the show notes at davebullis.com. But I'm actually looking for pretty much every member of crew except for a couple of positions I already have. It's going to be a fun, cool trailer project. So if you're interested, please shoot me an email. I'm talking to a few people and I'm constantly answering different emails about it. Speaking of which, if I owe you an email about coming onto the podcast, I promise I will get to it. I have so many emails to get through about coming onto this podcast, and I am so far behind. So please don't think I'm ignoring anybody. It's just the fact that I've got 10,000 things going on a day, and I just don't have time for it all. And sometimes things just get lost in the shuffle. So on that note, I just want to say on this episode of the podcast, I have a guest who has been a composer in some of the biggest movies like Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, Gladiator, Equilibrium, K-19. My guest and I are going to talk about all that, about how you actually work with guys like Hans Zimmer, how you actually develop soundtracks for these movies, how he actually got into that because he actually was from a completely different background. And we're also going to talk about FilmHub, which is another avenue for filmmakers. Again, it's all about this podcast is about, is all exploring all these different avenues, talking about where the film industry is headed, and just hearing all these crazy stories about how we all got here and some of the crazy things that we've seen on set. So without further ado, this is episode 214 with guest Klaus Badelt.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis Podcast.
Yeah, it was a bit odd. Like I had my first tech startup at 18, and then I sold that with 25 and turned around 180 degrees and did music. And then I, mostly film music, and then in Germany, and then I went on, I think, in 97, so I went on to go to Hollywood on vacation and got stuck here ever since.
So what kind of startup did you have?
That was already a tech startup. That was at the time when they didn't call it startup, you had to actually make money and to profit and to hire the next guy. And then I'm writing software at the time. Because a part of that decision was that the German music universities didn't take me, so I didn't manage to convince them with my entry exam performance. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to do the easier stuff, do that stuff I know anyway, and that's the computer stuff. And then only a few years later, I then said, you know what, this is good. It was a very successful company, and I feel it. Let's do music.
Yeah, it's so true with a lot of these startups. It's all about future earnings or potential value. Have you ever seen the TV show Silicon Valley?
Yeah, of course, exactly. It's all true.
Yeah, it's amazing. I have friends, who work out in Silicon Valley, and they swear by the show. They go, it is absolutely so true to life, where somebody makes a piece, you and I make a piece of software for a weekend in our apartment or a dorm room, and suddenly we're selling it on Monday for a couple million, maybe even more. And it doesn't really have an audience, or you know what I mean. It's just like this theoried piece of software that hasn't really proven it itself yet, but the potential value is there.
Yeah, no, it's been crazy. And now we're going basically backwards here, but I spent the last year quite a bit in Silicon Valley and learned how they do things there, learned some of the techniques, and it's great though. It's great how to run a company. I learned so much you can believe, but compare this to LA companies or European companies, how they operate, there's a very different way of running things. And I mean, it has to do with why I'm doing this startup as well in the film business, to bring in different dimensions, even the way of looking at it, and hoping to aiming at like redefining like a whole industry with this, because our industry here in the film business doesn't really work that way. Oriented with metrics, seeing that you operate fast and not out of your guts, but have data to back up what you actually do. And that's actually very refreshing to me now as a composer, where it's interesting. It's quite a bit similar, even though it sounds like it would be just emotional when you write and just intuitive. And that's true. But at the same time, now I'm really getting carried away. Stop me anytime. But when you write a theme, let's say for a movie, you are not a musician. You're a filmmaker, right? You have the first 5 minutes or 8 minutes, if you're lucky, to introduce the characters. You have to be very careful about the arc. You're telling the story. You make people hopefully love the characters, so they actually go along with whatever crazy story happens after. And there's a lot of, if you want, analytics about it. You have to, like a script. They have the acts. You're shaping something, and at the same time, you have to be very creative and emotional about it. So there's a great balance. I worked a lot with like songwriters, and when it comes to scores, you can't tell the songwriter to adjust, or you to react, or to tell the story. They tell the story in just their absolute space. And that often ends in a disaster anyway. But that's different stories. But you end up holding the hand and actually making it work to picture. You're like the director of music in a way. So that shows me every time that it's quite different. Writing music to movies is quite different to writing music, and there's lots of analytics comes into play.
What are some of the things you've noticed just working from Germany to working in here? Because you always hear a lot about, how we're, America is always compared to Europe, both in a good way and a bad way. So, I mean, what are some of your thoughts? I mean, have you noticed, do you like better working over here? I mean, because, if you were to stereotype Americans working, it's usually you never get a day off. You burn all your vacation days, and you never stop answering emails on your phone.
I mean, that's pretty much me. So obviously, I like it much better here. No, I mean, look, I've been here for 20. It's been now 20 years, and I think I can compare. And also traveled quite a bit because of the movies. I went a lot to China, a lot to Europe, different European countries, which are quite different anyway. UK is very different to France, very different to Germany when it comes to movies, but also to like companies and their attitude and people. I mean, there's a reason I'm here and I'm staying here and I live here. Is I do feel there's lots more. I wouldn't call the cliche freedom, but it's much more open what you do. Look, I would not have a career if it wasn't, I came here, I had no basically education, and when it comes to music, and you can do whatever you like as long as you make people feel comfortable and you do a good job. And that's a pretty unique situation, I think, in general, whether it's in tech or in film or music, but especially in music maybe and film, where you it's very hard to talk about music, right? To judge music. You have your opinion. I have my opinion. Everyone has. But what does the audience feel? Everyone is different. So there's no measurement, no picture you can see if it looks, you can measure it. You can look at the frame and say, look, move that visual effect a bit over to the left. But in music, it's really hard. So you have to have that trust. And I think people here are much more generally open. You can totally screw it up quickly, and then that's it. But you have much more of a chance, I think, to do things. And when yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to agree. As we talk about your music career. So, at what point did you realize that, hey, I want to start composing musical scores for movies, and you've done some video games too. So, at what point did you know that this is what you wanted to do?
I always did more movie than music. I mean, I had my first, I didn't have a keyboard first. I had like, a film camera first, and I shot some short movies with the neighbor's son and mother, something like that. But so I always felt for movies, but I really never knew that I wanted to do it. Like I said earlier, I started with something completely different. I wanted to, but I was not like, I think the part of it was that I wasn't sure if I could do it. And even when I arrived here and I sat here in front of, the picture and I looked at it and like, wow, that's really hard. I mean, I've done this for years, but every time for me, it's really hard to create music and to be creative. It's really like a writer friend once said, it's like, you have to pour gasoline all over yourself and burn it. And when you feel the pain, then you actually start really creating. It's a bit like that for me. And I'm not alone, I think, with that. So, the process is difficult and it's very rewarding when it works, but it takes a long time to get there.
So, obviously, I want to ask more about that because I think that is a really cool way to put it. When you start feeling that pain, and that's sort of the way you create. So, if we were to sort of take that and dig a little deeper, do you think that the whole like starving artist, create constant sort of pain? Do you think that is?
I noticed quite a few different types when I worked also with directors and also composers. It's really hard to strive the perfect balance that you are critical enough to create good stuff, but not question yourself to the level of pain that you cannot actually, that you're in your way and your own way of creating something good because you might see it. And I think that has to do with experience, but also, of course, with character you can get rid of. So it's this healthy balance where you don't be too full of yourself, but also be confident. I always say it's like what you need is a lot of character, but no ego. And that's very difficult, right? So you have to bring in this profile and make it very unique, find the unique voice when you create, but don't bring in your own personality when it comes to actually how to do the job. Because film is definitely teamwork. That's actually the essential multimedia event, right? You have sound, you have picture, you have the actors, you have the music. Well, it all comes together. So it's been always the teamwork, which what I like about film, and I've never been the type who like says like, oh, give me the picture. It used to be the tape, right? Give me the tape and don't talk to me for 6 weeks. But I always had like various studios where I moved close to where the director is. I have a place here, a mobile place when I'm at Warner Brothers, and I sit next to the director if they actually edit there, or wherever, or in Beijing, wherever I have to go, wherever the director is, I want to be, and right next to the editorial, and talk not about music, but like just absorb what they do. So you're part of that creative team, and you understand. I'm often on the set too, when you understand what it is the director actually wants to get out of it, how he sees that arc of the scene, the emotional arc, etc. So you're part of that, and you just have to express that in music, and the editor has to express this with the edit, but it's the same work.
So when you're on some of these movie sets, and you're getting that feeling, and you're not really thinking about the music, you're more ingrained in what everything's sort of like you're ingrained in the process of of how it's getting done and everything. Do you, when you do go back to that, or to start composing the music for this, like let's use Pirates of the Caribbean for instance, when you start going back and creating that music, you're just drawing from all that experience of being on set, of maybe talking with the director of what exactly not only just what the scene is about, or the sequence is about, but just about the whole sort of underlining current of the whole movie.
Yeah, actually, absolutely, yes. I couldn't agree more. I mean, maybe Pirates wasn't the best example because I had virtually no time to create it. But you know what? It was a good example in that way because you have to then trust your instincts and improvise. And then it comes to your what you do without thinking. But ultimately, it's a lot. You're right. It's a lot of if you want experience to look. I have a lot of young writers who virtually want to prove themselves, and I think they have to, and that's true. You have to, but and you hear these scores which all sound like a potpourri of stuff because they want to show off. They don't really actively or consciously do this, but it happens like that. And when you make music for film, you're subordinate to the whole multimedia event, to the whole story. You don't want to not dominate. I mean, there's strong music you have to write often, so you have to just be careful in the give and take.
So Klaus, let me ask you this: when you're online and maybe you're just looking around at different websites and stuff, have you ever come across some of the stock music websites?
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Look, I don't even do demos. In this industry, you have this where directors ask a handful of composers for demos, and it's not that I'm I don't know, arrogant enough to say oh no, I don't do demos. It's about I don't believe in that process because it's no process. It's a shot in the dark and something sticks, and then you don't know anything about the director-composer relationship, how it could develop, or if the composer understands your movie as a director. And so these sites are, of course, if you, I'm a writer. I always need picture to work against. I need to be the filmmaker. I admire that if you can write I imagine this kind of picture, and here I go. I don't think I ever done that. So it must be a very hard job actually to do that. And as a director, of course, you want that work relationship more than you want the music. The best directors I had, I like to work with, the best ways of working together was always a director where you do not want to show off, where you don't need to, you don't talk about music. You don't talk about what instrument you would like, or that's actually the second. It's not secondary, but that's the output. You're talking about the input. You're talking about what it is, what symbolically what it is, what's supposed to happen here. What's the emotional content? What's that scene for? What's the moment for? How do they feel, and how do you want the audience to feel? And by the way, when you write music, then you often, as a director, also notice this. You suddenly get into the weaknesses of the movie by putting music on it or writing to picture. You suddenly realize issues in editing and issues in we're not clear about that moment here. What do we actually want to say? So music kind of crystallizes that, takes it outside. And that's music as a filmmaker, right? As a character, as a part of the movie, not music put in and slapped on top, which sometimes works too, but that's not the same.
Yeah, like music as a character of itself. It's like the soundtrack of a life, because when you're watching a movie, it's the most interesting points of that character's life, and it's like this is the soundtrack of your life. You know what I mean? So
totally.
So Klaus, let me ask you this: when you're what movie have you seen recently where you have just been sort of blown away by the soundtrack?
I have to admit, I'm the guy with the smallest score collection, right? I have my inspiration doesn't really come from film music, and that's for several reasons. A, when you actually work, you inadvertently rip off, and you don't want that sound in your head. You don't even know where it comes from. I mean, I ripped myself off of a project I did 3 years ago and realized much later, oh my God, that's the same theme. I can't believe I wrote this again. And literally it happened, and nobody told me, and nobody noticed, obviously. But I get my inspiration from very different kinds of music. So I'm the wrong one to ask if you inspired by that kind of music. And it's if at all, it's movies. It would be hard for me to point out to. Is where non-traditional composers, right? We have too many guys who want to sound like, I don't know, Jerry Goldsmith or it's like this ideal which is over, and you need to develop new things and still serve the film. And you get this when, I don't know, when I listen to a Brian Eno score, that to me, well, not all of them, but there's some which were like, oh, this is interesting. I would have not done it like this. And I probably will never be able to do it like that, but that gives you inspiration. I have lots of playlists of songs, though, and classical music and electronic music where I keep as an inspiration, like to rolling in my head and in the background often, just to where I get something from.
So when you actually ripped off your own score, was it after the movie had come out? You're like, oh my god, did I already write that?
It was years after. Yeah, it was a TV show actually, and I ripped myself off, and I had no idea, and nobody at the time told me. And I mean, it wasn't like that bad, but it was the same tune, and it felt great at the time twice. I mean, for me, like oh, I did it. Look, that sounds great. Oh my gosh, I really this is good. It works. And I had done this before, and I don't know, it happens, and you don't want to. That's the last thing you want, and the last thing I want is to sound like something I did before, and the last thing I want to sound is like someone else who did something before. So, but it's really hard sometimes.
Yeah, it is. So speaking of, just of your process and everything like that, what is the absolute best experience that you've had making a score to a film?
And it's so many. I mean, there are a few, but I think often is the indie films which are more. You have an opportunity to have more integrity. It's easier to have integrity in terms of the collaboration, and there's less opinions out there. In Hollywood, there's a lot of different opinions, and it's great to work like that. But it's easy then to take the edge off everywhere, and then at the end you end up with something mediocre, because nobody dares. It's dangerous, right? So I had some films like I remember when Life Changing was when I did my first film in China, where the director Shen Kaige did let me write a little bit, put me up in a hotel in a lake to enjoy and write, and I thought I came up with something okay, and he listened to it and nodded and said, okay, let me make some phone calls. I think I'm going to, if you don't mind, send you around the country for the next few weeks, and you just absorb whatever we show you, so you get a much deeper feel for where we are with all this. Basically like a 4,000-year history lesson compressed in a few weeks of sightseeing, and that was part of this whole process there. And I think if I look back, I can hear that I was most inspired, and it took me 5 months there. And I remember when I came back here to Hollywood, people asked me, "So, I heard you moved to China." I'm like, "No, I just wrote a movie." But that was like life-changing event where you just want to be as good as the director, and you could never be achieve that, but you want to contribute, and there's a deep just deep inspiration. That was also a project where we never talked about the music. I visited him a few times, so traveled to China. We met for a week or two, and I don't think a single time we even looked at the film the first few times. We discussed his life and his symbolism in every shot, and in every not shot, but in every scene, what he envisioned for this, and you just learn. And we talked politics, and we talked all kinds of things, and then you're prepared to give. I think that makes a good director, right? Who is just interested in getting the best out of your creation instead of trying to squeeze you into a certain track.
So what did that with that after you went on this this sort of history lesson, this 4,000-year history lesson in a week or two, did when you got out and they finally you got back and they asked you to compose this piece, what was the outcome after that? I mean, was it a success?
It was a big movie there. It was called The Promise in China. It was one of the very first. It was 10 years ago, so it was one of the very first big effects movies, and the biggest I mean, you can hear in the themes. I had so many inspired themes in there, and they all did something for the movie at the right time. And the biggest compliment was like, look, I mean, I was this German guy or European guy who lives in Hollywood and does a Chinese movie. So what do you expect me? I asked him at the time. So I'm not the guy who writes you a Chinese movie. It was all in Chinese, of course, right? And he's like, no, and he wants people to, with the music, to open up the film and the understanding about the film to a greater audience, to a bigger audience. And that's exactly, okay, well, so I absorbed a lot of these Chinese instruments and history and stories and dances. I was at, in museums and at mountains, they performed dances to me, and I listened to ancient songs from all of these different minorities, and absorbed all this and put this in, but not to like rip it off, not to, use this as a superficial color and impose myself on it, but to really work it in and have flavors of this in there. And there was some European flavors in there, and of course Western flavors in there. So that was so satisfying for me as a process. And you can hear this in the inspiration. It's that there is something new created. And I heard some people told me that this is one of their favorite scores, and they didn't know the story. So you can always hear how inspired you are.
You mentioned about the indie films, and I earlier on I mentioned Pirates of the Caribbean. I imagine just for the sheer thrill of it, because Pirates of the Caribbean, no matter when it would come out, is going to be one of the biggest films of the year. From the first one to the fifth one, I think that came out a year or two ago. It's just the fact that it's it's a huge movie. It's got Johnny Depp. It's got a named director, Gore Verbinski, if I could actually talk, and and so I imagine when that comes out, I can only imagine, Klaus, when you could say, hey, listen, you see he's telling anybody, your friends, family, whoever, hey, Pirates of the Caribbean that's coming out, I did music for that movie, because everybody instantly knows, oh my God, that's a movie with Johnny Depp.
Right, of course. It's always great to have something where your family asks you, so what are you doing next? And you talk about a movie, and they're like, oh, I never heard of it. But and then there's one, there's the occasional film where like, oh yeah, that's in everybody's mind and theaters, and it's certainly one of the music pieces, but which are more known. But I don't know. Look at me. I'm proud of it, of course, about talking this down. But I did so many different things, and I always like to. It's so easy to fall into this Hollywood trap to like what you do too much, and career was never an option to me to be in the center of my own attention. I just did one thing after another, and honestly, I never really thought about like moving here. Was one thing I never really thought about. I was on vacation, like I said, and I go, oh, maybe I can do this. Of course, I loved it and I had the passion for it, but I never expected it to happen. I never expected it. And the same thing with right. So I had right after Pirates, for example, I didn't. Oh man, the last thing I would want to do is to do 2, 3, 4, 5, 17, make it a TV show. But instead, I remember at the time, where I used the opportunity then to do a movie with Dick Donner, do a movie with Wolfgang Peterson, to do a movie with Shane Kaige. All, what I just said, like went to China 5 months. My agent was like, pulling his hair out. It's like, what are you doing? This is like the moment you put your career. And it's not that I'm not interested, but that is exactly what I'm doing right now. Because of this, it enables me to do really interesting stuff. I've done a lot of French movies nobody cares for here in America. They don't travel, but just so amazingly satisfying that someone will hear the work ultimately, and then you get another job based on something you did which nobody would have given you. Like I did suddenly comedy in New York. Wow. Nobody would have hired me for a New York style comedy because I did Pirates of the Caribbean, but they did that because they heard, Pidine Nicolas in Paris when they went on vacation or had a meeting, and like, who is this? And what? This is German guy. Amazing. Let's do that. So this is, I think, if you constantly do good work and try to not really if you always reinvent yourself and try not to repeat too much, because everybody wants that. Like, they put your music in the temp and say, I want exactly this. Don't change a note. This works great. Can you do this again? That's how often you get an assignment here, is that you are in the temp. And sorry, but the last thing I would want to do is, if I was a director, I would ask the composer to write exactly the same thing again. That's like so not inspiring for anyone, and you probably can hear this. And you can hear, you can hear composer, I won't mention names, of films definitely, where you you're like, well, I know exactly what happened in the cutting room, how they asked the composer what to do, and you can hear it. And that's not what I'm interested in.
You know what? I found that in Klaus. I found that in the latest Star Wars films.
Yeah.
I like Star Wars. I like the idea behind it. I come from it from more of a writing perspective, because if you ask me what I am out of everything, don't be, if that's why whenever someone says they're a jack of all trades, Klaus, I kind of go, well, everyone has to specialize in something. Everybody, you can have knowledge of everything, but everyone at the end of the day, everyone specializes in something. That brought, because that's what brought you to the dance. You have, there's one thing that you do well. So for me, it's writing, and when I'm watching these Star Wars, the new ones, and I'm sitting there and I just feel like everything is exactly the same. It's the same beats, it's the same shots, it's the same music. It's literally so it's gotten so repetitive.
Yeah, I mean, this is what now we're getting into what I think is a bit of a problem of Hollywood, and a serious problem of Hollywood the last few years, especially. That we are not afraid to tell a story, but yeah, in a way, like, it's risky now to tell new stories. It has to be a franchise. And then you do that. And as long as there's a lot of people paying tickets for that, how can that be wrong, right? And it's okay. I mean, we have to all keep the lights on and keep the industry going. It's just not so much what I did do. I was about to say I never did sequels. I did do sequels, I have to admit. But when it was, I made sure that, if possible, this was like, okay, there's a franchise by the new director, a new, like, a restart of something, like, a fresh angle at something. Like when I did my first horror film, I told the director, I don't like horror. I'm not a big horror fan, sorry. But so why are you asking me? And then we started talking, and it turns out he neither. So we want to do something, a genre, but something different. And there was, in that case, it wasn't really a horror film, but like Constantine. There was a lot of like dark stuff in there. And it ended up with almost like a French impressionist film score. So then I think that's interesting stuff happens, and we've become a bit afraid of doing this here, and that's why indie film can often be, this way you try out things and then they become mainstream. I personally think that indie is the new mainstream anyway. Look, the last 10 years, it's been always indie films winning or being nominated for all kinds of awards. But and there's always that commercial blockbuster thinking where you have to do another sequel of another prequel of another TV show. I don't know, I'm just coming off a film which had, like, it's the fourth installment, but there was a new idea again in there. It's called I think I can talk about it. So in the making, it's called Ocean's 8. It's the Ocean's 11 idea, only a very different cast and a very different, fresh idea. It's an all-female cast. It's fantastic. It's very funny and it's like smart, right? So that I can live with, and it's a good mix of being okay, it's commercially very viable, but at the same time, there's a lot of new and fresh ideas, and and there's a twist in it, and you can tell the twist and work on the twist.
Yeah, I actually have heard of Ocean's 8. The all-female, based upon the George Clooney movie, Ocean's 11, but instead of being all males, all females. And so, I mean, when you do something like that, and you're sort of brought onto this franchise, is there any expectations at all? I mean, because what I mean by that is, are they saying like, hey, listen, Klaus, if you listen to Ocean's 11, 12, or what have you, this is what they did here, and we want something kind of similar, and is it anything like that?
Yes and no. Look, I mean, they could have easily asked the old composer to do that if they want that same thing again. But there's a reason they didn't. But there's also the expectations of the audience that I remember when working on Miami Vice, right? The audience has a certain expectation, and you, as a director or as a composer too, you cannot ignore the audience. You should never do that. You play with that. And Miami Vice was very hard because the movie was very dark and very different than what, the TV show was 30 or 20 years before that. And here too, it's slightly different, but it plays with it. And actually, to me, that's fun. That's okay. That's smart. That's fulfilling the expectation and hopefully adding that twist to it so it's interesting and fresh again. That's fun. That's not like, okay, you have to do, I don't know, Pirates of the Caribbean times 17 and they want exactly the same thing.
I actually really enjoy the Ocean's movies, so I'll check out Ocean's 8. But it's kind of like, again, I was saying, I totally get what you're saying about the indie films. It's kind of like, writing. It's like composing itself. We're on an indie film. You have a lot more freedom, but when you're on a big blockbuster, your freedom is kind of constricted. But when you're telling people about it, you're like, well, hey, listen, I just did music for etc. They're like, oh wow, I actually, like, holy crap, Johnny Depp. Sorry, I keep going back to Johnny Depp, but he's a very good example. You know what I mean? of what I'm trying to say.
You have that obsession with Johnny Depp. I like that. No, but I know what you mean. Yeah, no, it's this exactly. Like, it's so tempting. But again, I remember this when my mom asked me, so I just came out of the meeting with Steven Spielberg and he kind of ripped half of the score apart on Gladiator, and we were like, gosh, this was one of the hardest days of my life at the time. And I tried to tell a little bit like, look, Mom, we just did this. And she's like, okay, but do we eat enough? So, it grounds you. She didn't care. And you get back to like, okay, you know what? You need to bypass all this hype about yourself and about others and just get to work. So I'm not really impressed ultimately when it comes to celebrities. It's only I'm impressed when, again, and I get starts like when they actually deliver and when you work with them and you realize and understand why they are who they are. Then it gets very, very interesting. There's some directors I had here, when you work with Tom Cruise or so, then it's, you understand, where the success comes from if you have a chance to work with. But again, in indie, it's as refreshing and as taxing to your creativity. And again, you have more freedom to get out of, do out of the box thinking. And you can see now that the audience is really tired of the same, Game of Thrones and Batmans and stuff, right? They'll see it, they'll watch it, but, I lately did gathered a lot of data about this too. And not only they felt it, but there is a lot of data that people are, want more variety. Now that you have the internet, you watch much more, and you have theoretically access to much more. You don't have these gatekeepers because of shelf space, right? Before you could go to Blockbuster only, and they had limited shelf space, so they couldn't put up everything, or the theaters could only take on one movie a night or something, right? But now you have all this plus the unlimited resources of the internet, so you should be able to watch much more, and more and more people want that. They expect like everything to be available, and that's a big chance of indie. I think that you have now the chance of being successful without being broadcast style popular. That means you don't have to have the millions of viewers or tickets sold or something. Without that, your movie is a flop. I worked on many flops. I know exactly how hard that pressure is, right? and how limiting it can be. But now you can create something and you make this for maybe a smaller segment of an audience, or have more integrity. It's a little bit like music. Like you had to go to a recording studio. You had to use that 2-inch machine, that tape machine, and it was all very expensive. You had to pay the thousands of dollars per day. So you had to have all this machine would pay for this, and the industry and all this. These days, or like for a few years now, you can actually write. I've heard the best productions coming from your laptop with some, I don't know, Pro Tools or whatnot on it, and it's really great stuff. You don't need at all, and it sounds amazing too. You just need talent, good ideas, and we have this now in movies too, right? That's the big chance of indie. We have now digital production pipelines make it very, very cheap for you to produce now. I don't know, including visual effects on your laptop at Starbucks, which rival those we do here in those visual effects studios. But not only visual effects, that's just an example of everything. You still need, just like in music, a good idea, tasteful implementation, etc. That's still the same, but you have now a great opportunity that you can move now a lot of things yourself. And that there's a demand on the other side of people who want to watch more different things, want to watch and give the attention to your indie film. Whereas before they didn't even have access to it because it wasn't there, it wasn't available. And now we can make it available in the new world there.
Yeah, you mentioned Tom Cruise, by the way, too, Klaus. I once met. I forget what he actually is to Tom, but he just said that he before he even met Tom, he goes he always wondered what he was going to be like, and then he said once I met him, I knew why he was successful, and he goes he wakes up every day at 4 or 5 in the morning, he gets up and he just starts going. And he goes, he never complains about having to be on set or do another take. He never complains about having to do extra work. He goes, all the guy does is he's professional as can be. And he goes, I've never seen him with a bad attitude whatsoever. And he goes, he gets a lot of crap in the media for different things. He goes, but all that aside, he goes, the guy just is a really hard worker.
Yeah, in the tabloid news, that's one thing. But as a hard worker, exactly. I mean, he was actually fantastic to work with. He was probably the only, he wasn't even the director on the film I worked with him, but, the only producer who, he had no problems seriously going out at night to the deli and get everyone who was still working, because we had to work all night for the last few nights, to get us some food. So he had Tom Cruise looking over my shoulder, taking an order for Jerry's Deli. So that's true, and that's not like he wanted to be a nice guy. He's just like, yeah, let's do it. Keep working, and I really appreciate that. And then you can see how this leads to success, and well, of course, how it can lead to controversy. But he's a very visible man, so in the news and everywhere. So, but again, I focus always, like I said earlier, I like to focus on actually working with these guys, and that's when they gain my respect, and then you realize, oh yeah, okay, I know now why.
Yeah, and see, again, stories like that about Tom, just insanely hard worker and just likes what he does, and that's why when his movies come out, I'm always interested to see how well they do. Again, with the whole balancing the tabloid side of things, and what I mean, I saw The Mummy. And I could definitely see what they were trying to do with it. I just think that the Mummy as itself, the premise itself, works at its best when Brendan Fraser had the series.
Exactly. I agree.
Because Brendan Fraser he's just that he looks like a leading man, but he also can act like a goofball. You know what I mean? And it's that funny, and you know what I mean? And it's just. It works so well. I think the Mummy with Tom Cruise just took itself too seriously, and I think a lot of audiences now, with all the options, with all the options of TV and YouTube and everything else, and also with still going to the theater, I don't know if if it found its. I know it didn't find itself. You know, some of the horror in it was fantastic, but I just think at the end of the day, you know, it's a lot of pressure to put on a movie to set up an entire universe. So, you know, essentially it has, because, it has to do so many things well, and at the same time it has to be a movie by itself. So, it's a lot to do, and I think it got pulled in too many directions.
That happens a lot, and again, it's hard because we seem to only be able to do franchises and refactor them right now. Oh, like that's the big thing to do. Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. Like the perfect anti-hero, was Brendan Fraser, and reminds me of, I don't know, Harrison Ford. Indiana Jones. Like he's like you want that character who's like, you say goofy, but he's more like he can do it actually, but he doesn't want to, and that's not the character. He comes in. Tom is always Tom Cruise, right? And there's. No matter, he's good. He's a great actor, actually. But he I really admire his skills. No questions. No matter how thin the movie exact is, but he's really great. But he's always giving himself into it. So do you expect that with him? It's hard to play against your own character.
Yeah, it's true, and he's doing what he likes and doing what he loves, and he does all his own stunts too. And I know, Klaus, we talk about distribution. I want to talk about FilmHub. I know we're starting to run out of time. Klaus, it's kind of like a movie. It's like how do we get all this in here? We've got too much to cover. We don't have enough time.
Don't worry about it. No, this is not supposed to. I like to talk about creativity, and I like to talk about. The force and the awakening now indie should have, and I want to bring, because I believe in it myself, and I've done it a lot, and with indie film, and I believe that there's now this big change and distribution or whatever. The overall solution is that we have now, as indie filmmakers, a new confidence. We should have it, and who doesn't have it yet should learn about it, because it is now possible. All I'm doing all the time now is either with music in films to support this, and with FilmHub I'm doing this to support it on a much larger scale, hopefully, that you can now check this off as a commodity. You can now do films cheaper with your digital cameras. You can now do visual effects cheaper with or on your own. You can now check that off and check off distribution. You can now be in every living room in the world. And you have to think of the world and not just your own country, or we have to stop with thinking in domestic and foreign terms. We have to stop with territorial limitations. We have to stop thinking windowing. This is all what the audience doesn't want. This is all what the industry wants to make a bit more money, to extort it even more, to milk the cow more. But just like in music, we've seen music is like a few years ahead of us in film. You can see how things happen there, because also the difference to me is only like bandwidth, right? Music is just less bandwidth needed, but you can see the same flow, and you can learn from that. You can see how unimportant a big industry can render itself, and then they come back to like, what's the actual value? Hollywood does have a big value, but indie film has a much larger value than we have given us so far, and to strengthen that, in this case with the distribution platform, where you don't have to pay anything and just be there and let it check it off and then keep creating, and we have much more to do there. It's still, even though we have the internet and everybody can now watch and whatever they want, whenever they want it, and wherever they want it. That doesn't mean you make movies, by the way, for cell phones, right? Like this has been talked about like for the last 10 years, but that's not the case. You just have much more freedom as the audience now to watch what you like. It's harder to find what you like because there's so much more now, but we have to now put all these tools into place, all these digital tools into place, and leverage them as filmmakers. You got to move on and embrace this too. We have to stop being that dinosaur ourselves. And there's a lot more to talk about, right? When it comes to But in general, it means like this is a great opportunity. This is the digital opportunity now to create actually very beautiful and meaningful film. Again, more than, if I may say so, Hollywood is dares to produce at this point.
Yeah, and that's why, stuff like FilmHub, and I was reading your website too. I've had other people on here like Jason Brubaker from Distributor, things like that, where people are companies like yourself. They're it's a way to get on Amazon. It's a way to get on Hulu. So people can, because those are where the eyeballs are, right? Especially with Amazon. Especially with Amazon, the way it's becoming. They're trying to get more into the video market. Hulu is Hulu, and all these different channels. How do you stand out? How do you get your film on there? Because, even a couple years ago, I remember, just talking to people, and I would say, how the hell do you even get a film on here? How do you get a film on any of these platforms? Do you have to get a sales agent to pitch to them? And, a few years ago, maybe you did. You know what I mean? And actually, you did have to. They had to have the contacts. They had to go through this. And then you had to have deliverables the right way. And,
Right, exactly.
Seriously. And Netflix has their own way of delivering films, and it's just, do you have all that? Even deliverables a few years ago before that, Klaus, you had to have, do you have a 35 millimeter print? Do you have this? Do you have that? And you're like, well, for indie filmmakers, that's what how much did prints used to cost like $50,000, I think, or something like that, or maybe exactly. A lot more. So
right, exactly.
So now, yeah, seriously, it's and so that's why. I wanted to have you on, Klaus, to talk about FilmHub and just all this stuff. I know we're running out of time, but just in closing, Klaus, is there any sort of parting thoughts that you wanted to say to sort of put a period at the end of this whole conversation?
Well, again, I think it's about, and I love coming on the show like this, is to talk about the strength of indie, and that we have to develop now really quick our own confidence more than, we think that often. I was at Sundance again, and everywhere I go in these festivals, we still think too much of what we want to achieve is to beat the old system, to get your film being picked up in terms of like a recording artist in music. That also already means the kiss of death. You have to develop it on your own and be your own, have an ownership model. You have to change the model. And then the creativity can actually continue. And so what we're building here with this FilmHub, for example, what I'm doing with my movies to support like Chinese movies is like there is such a variety out there, and we just have to keep going, creating great stuff. And this is now a much more open world. And then maybe next time we can talk a bit more about how I see what in my opinion the right way forward is, the right vision forward is, where this industry can be in 5 years. But that's maybe too much for now. I could talk about it next time.
I know. I'm actually now. I'm tempted to keep talking to you. Just to, what I mean. I know you got to run, but I'm just tempted to keep you hanging on just to sort of finish that thought. That's why I'm getting back into the swing of things too. I got just burned out from doing things, and now for listeners who've listened to the past couple of episodes, Klaus, they know I'm actually going to start making. I want to make a faux trailer again, just a fun fake trailer, and throw it up on YouTube. I've been doing a lot more stuff, just with getting into the saddle with this creative stuff. I've always been writing. It's just getting back into it, because I realize, I just talking with everybody, even, every guest, I always hear different things, and it's just important to keep going and keep trying and getting back out there. Because I flat out would be very honest with everybody. I got so burned out, Klaus, from just the amount of bullcrap, just from projects never went anywhere, to you shoot a project and then somebody holds it hostage on a hard drive, which I've seen, that only happened to me once, thankfully, but other people, it's happened to them like 2 or 3 times, just crazy editors, because they're just sitting in the dark the whole time, and they kind of snap. But again, I know you have to go, Klaus, and so again, I want to say thank you for coming on. And where can people find you at online?
So we're at filmhub.com, and my own personal website is at klausbadelt.com or klausbadelt.com. So you can find me there and go from there and reach out on Twitter. We're a FilmHub HQ. I monitor that personally too. and yeah, get in touch and let's keep creating that revolutionary like that. And I love that getting back into it too. We have to keep creating. That's the idea.
Yeah, you got to have one foot in theory and one foot in practice. It's dangerous when you know what I mean. So
exactly.
So
I love that.
Thank you, Klaus. It's off top of my head, buddy. It's off top of my head. So everyone, it's DaveBullis.com. Twitter, it's @DB Podcast. Klaus, I want to say Auf Wiedersehen and Danke.
Very good.
Thank you. See that rudimentary German helped out.
There you go. That'll help you worldwide.
Yeah.
No, thank you for having me. A lot of fun. I keep following your podcast, and I hope it was a little bit insightful for someone.
Find Dave at davebullis.com. Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.